The first alert hit my phone at 6:12 in the morning. Motion detected. West Ranch Gate. I was in the barn, half asleep, pouring feed into a cracked plastic bucket, while the sky was still gray over the pasture. At first, I thought it was deer. The camera at that gate caught deer, coyotes, stray dogs, and once a teenager from Cedar Valley Estates trying to take a shortcut on a dirt bike. Then the second alert came. Person detected. Vehicle detected. I opened the camera feed and froze. Karen was standing at my ranch gate with a security volunteer, a contractor in a reflective vest, and a pair of bolt cutters. The west gate was not an HOA gate. It was not a neighborhood entrance. It was not a resident shortcut. It was a locked ranch gate on my land, covering an old emergency access road that crossed the back of my property. The fire department had a lockbox for real emergencies. The sheriff's office knew the access protocol, and the county had the route documented. But Karen, the HOA president of Cedar Valley Estates, was standing there like she owned it. I jumped on the ATV and tore down the pasture lane as fast as I could without flipping it. By the time I reached the gate, the contractor already had the bolt cutters around my lock. I shouted for him to stop. Karen did not even flinch. She said the HOA was removing an unsafe obstruction from an emergency access route. She said I had ignored community safety long enough. She said Cedar Valley residents could not be held hostage by one rancher and one old lock. There was no fire, no ambulance, no sheriff call, no evacuation, and no county order. It was just Karen, a contractor, and a fake emergency she had created because the HOA wanted my ranch road opened while their main entrance was under repair. I told her the fire department already had access. She said that was not good enough anymore. Then she looked at the contractor and said, "Cut it. We cannot let one rancher endanger the whole community." The lock snapped onto the dirt, the gate swung open, and within minutes, 2 HOA trucks and a resident SUV drove through my property like the road had suddenly become theirs. I did not shove anyone. I did not block the vehicles, and I did not grab the bolt cutters. I recorded everything. Karen thought cutting one lock would make Cedar Valley safer, more convenient, and more valuable. She thought the word emergency gave her permission to ignore my deed. What she did not know was that the easement had a clause written for exactly this: unauthorized lock cutting, unauthorized gate opening, non-emergency traffic, and misuse of emergency access. Any one of those triggered suspension. By the end of that week, the gate would be locked again under fire marshal protocol. The HOA's access would be suspended. The sheriff would refuse to make me open it. The developer would have to remove secondary emergency access from its marketing, and Cedar Valley residents would learn that Karen had not protected their emergency road. She had lost it for them. The West Ranch Gate was never meant to be convenient. That was the entire point. My family ranch sits behind Cedar Valley Estates, on the far side of a line of oaks and a dry creek that only runs after heavy rain. The ranch is not huge by Texas standards, but it is enough land to require gates, fences, a barn, a well house, and roads that do not show up correctly on most GPS apps. The West Access Road is a dirt and gravel track that runs across the back pasture, through a cattle gate, past the well house, and out toward a narrow county shoulder near Cedar Valley's rear boundary. My father built most of it before the HOA existed. He used it for feed trucks, fence repair, storm cleanup, and getting equipment to the back section without tearing up the front yard. When Cedar Valley Estates was first developed, the county and the fire department had concerns about emergency access. The subdivision had one main entrance. If a flood, fallen tree, accident, or wildfire blocked that entrance, emergency vehicles might need a secondary route. The developer came to my father. He did not want to sign anything at first, as he had seen what happened when private land became useful to people who did not own it. But he also was not the kind of man who would risk lives just to make a point. So he agreed to an emergency access easement, but he made it tight. The road stayed private. The gate stayed locked. The fire department would have lockbox access. The sheriff and emergency services could use it when needed, and utility crews could use it during real emergency repairs. The HOA could not hold its own key. They could not open it for residents, and they could not cut locks, remove gates, widen the road, use it for construction traffic, advertise it as resident access, or treat it like a second entrance. And there was a remedy. If the HOA misused the road, opened the gate without authorization, cut the lock, or allowed non-emergency traffic, the landowner could suspend HOA access until the breach was cured, costs were paid, and the fire marshal reviewed the protocol. My father insisted on that clause. At the time, I thought he was being overly suspicious. Now I think he was generous for signing anything at all. For years, the arrangement worked. The gate stayed locked, and the fire department had the lockbox. Once, during a storm, a deputy and fire truck came through because a tree had blocked Cedar Valley's main entrance. I opened the pasture gate afterward and fixed the ruts myself. Nobody argued. Nobody pretended the road belonged to the HOA. Then Karen became HOA president. Karen saw every boundary as a negotiation she had not won yet. She started using the phrase, life safety, in almost every email. She said Cedar Valley needed better emergency circulation. She said the West Ranch Gate created anxiety for residents. She said families had asked why one private owner controlled a route that could help the community. I told her the answer was simple. Because the route was on private property, and because emergency access was already handled through the lockbox. She did not like that. She said safety should not depend on outdated rural arrangements. She asked for a resident emergency code. I told her there was no keypad and no resident code. She asked for a duplicate HOA key. I sent her the easement language, saying the HOA could not hold one. She asked that the gate be opened during wildfire season. I told her fire and sheriff access was already preserved. She began telling residents a different story. I know because some of them forwarded me meeting clips. Karen told them the West Ranch Gate was a single point of failure. She said the board was working to improve secondary access. She said Cedar Valley could not rely on one stubborn ranch owner during a crisis. She never explained that the fire department already had a key system. She never explained that the road was not HOA property, and she never explained that the easement was for emergency services, not daily traffic. That was how she worked. She did not have to lie all at once. She just left out the parts that made her powerless. And if you have ever lived beside an HOA, you know how dangerous that can become. Residents hear safety, children, emergency, fire, and ambulance, and they stop asking where the property line is. Fear turns a locked gate into a villain. I kept warning her in writing. The gate is legal, the lockbox is active, the road is private, non-emergency resident traffic is prohibited. Do not cut the lock, do not open the gate, and do not advertise the road. She ignored all of it, because Karen did not want emergency access. She wanted control. The main entrance repair was the excuse she had been waiting for. Cedar Valley sent out a notice saying the front entrance would be under construction for 45 days. The road would remain open, but traffic would be slower. Residents might have to wait at flaggers, delivery trucks might be rerouted, and school traffic could be delayed. To Karen, that was a crisis. She emailed me the same afternoon. She said the HOA expected the West Ranch Gate to be open temporarily to maintain emergency readiness and resident circulation. She said the board had a responsibility to protect residents. She said the inconvenience caused by the main entrance work created an elevated safety concern. I replied with the easement attached. I wrote one paragraph. Emergency access remains available through the approved lockbox protocol. General resident traffic is not allowed. The gate will remain locked except for authorized emergency, sheriff, fire, ambulance, utility emergency, or county-approved access. Karen responded 2 hours later. Your refusal is unreasonable. and may expose you to liability if residents are endangered. I saved it. Then the pressure started. A security volunteer came by and said he was there to inspect the gate for safety. I asked who sent him. He said the HOA Access Committee. I told him to leave, and he took pictures before he did. 2 days later, a contractor called my phone and said he had been asked to price improvements for the West Emergency Road. I asked who gave him my number. He said Cedar Valley Management. I told him the road was private and no work was authorized. A week later, a resident stopped at my front fence and asked if I could please just open the back gate during the construction. She said Karen told everyone the ranch road had been designated as the emergency detour. I told her it had not. She looked confused and said the HOA newsletter made it sound official. That newsletter became evidence. Cedar Valley Emergency Access Update. Board pursuing temporary use of West Ranch Gate to ensure resident safety. Temporary use. They had already changed the language from emergency access to resident circulation. Then came the developer brochure. Cedar Valley was adding a small luxury section near the back of the subdivision. The brochure mentioned secondary emergency-ready access through the West Ranch Gate. It did not say the gate was locked. It did not say the road was private. And it did not say the HOA had no right to use it for residents or marketing. I printed it. Karen held an HOA meeting 3 nights before she cut the lock. A neighbor sent me the recording. She showed a photo of my locked gate on a projector screen. She told residents that Cedar Valley had been placed in a vulnerable position because one ranch owner refused to cooperate with reasonable safety measures. She said the board had consulted contractors and was considering steps to remove unnecessary obstacles from emergency routes. A man asked if the fire department could access the gate. Karen said, "In theory." That was misleading. The fire department did not have theoretical access. It had lockbox access, and Karen knew that. The morning she cut the lock, I reached the gate just as the contractor closed the bolt cutters. The sound was small. That surprised me. For something that violated years of recorded property rights, the snap of that lock was almost quiet. I told them they had no authorization. Karen said the HOA had authority to protect life safety. I said there was no emergency. She pointed toward Cedar Valley and said, "The emergency is that we have hundreds of residents relying on a blocked route." I told her resident convenience was not an emergency. She said I would regret that statement. Then the gate opened. A Cedar Valley maintenance truck drove through first, then a security vehicle, and then a resident SUV that had clearly been waiting on the other side. I filmed the license plates, the gate, the broken lock, the contractor, the security volunteer, and Karen's face as she realized I was recording. She told me I was creating a scene. I said, "No, you created the scene. I'm preserving it." Then I called the sheriff. Karen smiled like that helped her. She truly believed the word emergency would make the deputy ignore the deed. The sheriff's deputy did not force anyone to do anything that morning. He documented. That was fine with me. He took photos of the cut lock, the gate, the contractor's truck, the security volunteer, the vehicles that had passed through, and the easement packet I had printed from my binder. He wrote down that there was no active fire, no medical emergency, no evacuation, no law enforcement pursuit, and no county order requiring the gate to be opened. Karen kept saying life safety. The deputy kept asking for the emergency. She did not have one. After he left, I retrieved the cut lock from the dirt and put it in a plastic bag. I saved the camera footage from the gate camera, the trail cam facing the road, and the video from my phone. I backed everything up twice, and then I called my attorney. He was a real estate attorney who handled easements and rural access disputes. I sent him the deed, the emergency access easement, the fire department lockbox agreement, my emails with Karen, the HOA newsletter, the developer brochure, the footage, and the sheriff report number. He called me back that afternoon and said, "This is exactly why suspension clauses exist," but he told me not to close the gate yet. That mattered. If I reacted too quickly, Karen could claim I blocked emergency services out of anger. We needed to prove that emergency access remained protected, and that the only thing being suspended was HOA misuse. So we gathered the record. First, the survey. A licensed surveyor confirmed the gate, the road, the ditch, and the first 300 yards of the access route were entirely inside my ranch parcel. The HOA owned none of it, and the county owned none of it. The easement was limited and defined. Second, the county road map. It showed no public road, no dedication, no county maintenance, and no subdivision street at that location. Third, the fire marshal. My attorney contacted the fire marshal and requested an inspection of the lockbox and access protocol. The fire marshal confirmed the lockbox was functional, the department had access, and a locked gate was acceptable under the easement and emergency plan as long as the approved emergency access system remained in place. That letter was everything. Karen's entire argument was built on fear that emergency services were blocked, but the fire marshal said they were not. Fourth, the sheriff's office. The report confirmed no emergency call existed at the time Karen cut the lock. There was no fire dispatch, no ambulance request, no deputy order, and no evacuation. Fifth, the easement language. My attorney highlighted the key sections. Gate may remain locked. Emergency lockbox approved. The HOA shall not cut locks, remove gates, replace locks, control access, or permit non-emergency traffic. It further stated that unauthorized opening or non-emergency use constitutes breach, and upon breach, the landowner may suspend HOA access until cure, reimbursement, written compliance, and review. It was almost as if my father had predicted Karen personally. Then we pulled Cedar Valley's own communications, the newsletter calling the West Ranch Gate necessary for resident circulation, the meeting clip of Karen calling the locked gate a single point of failure, the security memo assigning a volunteer to monitor the West Gate opening, the contractor invoice for the gate opening, and the developer brochure showing secondary emergency-ready access. Those documents proved intent. This was not a panicked emergency act. It was a planned effort to turn emergency access into HOA access. The demand letter went out 5 days after the lock was cut. It demanded reimbursement for the lock, gate damage, attorney fees, survey costs, and fire marshal review. It demanded the HOA stop all non-emergency traffic, stop advertising or describing the road as resident access, correct communications to residents, remove the developer brochure language, and acknowledge the breach in writing. It also gave notice that if the HOA failed to cure, access would be suspended under the easement. Karen responded through the management company. The HOA acted in good faith to protect life safety and disputes your interpretation. That was all we needed. She had notice, she had the documents, and she refused to cure. 2 days later, my attorney sent the suspension notice. Then we replaced the lock. We chose a new approved lock and lockbox protocol reviewed with the fire marshal. The fire department retained access, sheriff dispatch was notified, and emergency access remained exactly what the easement required. The sign went up the same day, private ranch emergency access. Fire sheriff, ambulance only, HOA access suspended for breach, no resident traffic. Karen saw it within an hour and called the sheriff again. This time, the deputy already knew the file. Karen had reported that I closed an emergency access road and endangered Cedar Valley residents. She told dispatch that the HOA had opened the route for safety, and I had relocked it in retaliation. When the deputy arrived, she was waiting near the gate with 2 board members, the security volunteer, and a small crowd of residents. Some looked genuinely scared, while others looked annoyed. One man kept saying an ambulance would never get through because of me. The deputy asked if there was an active emergency. Karen said the emergency was ongoing because the main entrance was under repair. He asked if fire, ambulance, or sheriff needed access at that moment. She said not at that moment. He asked if she had a court order requiring the gate to be opened for residents. She said the HOA had easement rights. He asked to see them. I handed over the same packet as before, plus the fire marshal letter, suspension notice, sheriff report from the lock cutting, county road map, and survey. The deputy read longer this time. Then he asked Karen a question that made the whole crowd go quiet. Who cut the lock? Karen said the HOA removed an obstruction. He asked again, who cut the lock? The contractor was not there, so Karen had to answer. She said the board authorized action through a contractor. He wrote that down. Then he told her he was not going to order me to open a private ranch gate where emergency access was preserved, and the dispute involved a recorded easement breach. He said residents could not use the road unless they had legal authorization or a court order. He also warned everyone not to cut the lock again, move the gate, drive around it, or trespass. That was the moment Karen's story broke. Not completely. Karen could still talk, but the law enforcement performance she expected did not happen. The sheriff did not remove my lock, he did not declare it a community road, and he did not turn emergency language into resident access. The first legal turn was simple. The road was private. The second was scope. The easement was emergency access, not general HOA traffic. The third was the lockbox. Fire and sheriff access remained available. The fourth was breach. Karen had cut a lock with no emergency, no order, and no authority. The fifth was remedy. The easement allowed suspension after misuse. Once those pieces lined up, Karen's word, emergency, lost its magic. Residents began asking questions online almost immediately. Someone posted a picture of the new sign, and someone else asked why the fire department could get through, but residents could not. A volunteer firefighter who lived in Cedar Valley commented that Knox boxes and lockbox protocols were normal and not dangerous. That comment did more damage to Karen than anything I said, because it came from inside the community. Then another resident posted the developer brochure showing secondary emergency-ready access through the West Ranch Gate. Buyers started asking whether that access was legal. Realtors began removing the phrase from online listings, and the developer contacted the HOA and asked for documentation supporting the marketing language. Karen did not have it. She had an easement that said the opposite. The developer's attorney sent a letter reserving rights because Cedar Valley had represented the West access as part of the project's emergency planning. The county planning office was notified. Title reviewers started asking whether any access right had been overstated, and the fire marshal requested corrected public communication so residents would understand emergency services had access, but residents did not. Karen tried to say the HOA never intended daily resident use, but my attorney sent the newsletter calling it resident circulation, the security memo ordering the West Gate opening, the meeting video talking about removing unnecessary obstacles, and the footage of her ordering the cut. Every document pointed to the same conclusion. Karen had used safety as a mask for convenience. And once that was obvious, the residents who had been frightened by the locked gate became angry about being misled. The fire marshal's inspection happened in front of 3 board members. That was not my choice. Karen insisted representatives needed to observe because the HOA had safety concerns. I did not mind. By then, I wanted everyone to hear the answer directly. The fire marshal checked the gate, lockbox, access markers, road width, approach angle, and emergency procedure. He confirmed the department had what it needed. He confirmed the locked gate was acceptable under the protocol, and he confirmed there was no current order requiring the gate to be opened for general traffic. One board member asked if resident access would improve safety. The fire marshal said, "Resident convenience is not the same as emergency access." There it was again, the sentence that kept killing Karen's argument. After that, County Planning issued a written clarification. The West Ranch Road was not approved as a residential detour, construction route, or secondary entrance for Cedar Valley residents or expansion buyers. Any use beyond the recorded emergency access would require new landowner authorization, county review, and recorded documents. The developer pulled the brochure. Not revised, pulled. That made residents pay attention. The emergency HOA meeting was called the next week. It was packed, because Karen had spent months making the locked gate sound like a life-or-death issue. Parents came angry. Older residents came worried. Buyers from the new section came confused. And a developer representative sat in the back with a legal pad. Karen opened by saying the board had taken decisive action to protect the community and that outside resistance had complicated the matter. Then my attorney asked to show the video. Karen objected, but residents shouted her down. So the footage played. Karen at the gate, the contractor with bolt cutters, the security volunteer filming, Karen saying, "Cut it. We cannot let one rancher endanger the whole community," the lock snapping, and HOA vehicles driving through. Then the sheriff report appeared on the screen showing no active emergency, followed by the fire marshal letter showing emergency access was maintained, followed by the easement clause stating the HOA shall not cut locks, remove gates, control access, or permit non-emergency traffic. Finally, the suspension clause appeared. Breach permits suspension until cure. The room changed. You could feel it. Residents who had been angry at me started looking at Karen, not because they suddenly cared about easement law, but because they understood the trick. They had been told I was blocking emergency responders. Now they were seeing that responders had access all along. A woman near the front stood up and asked, "So the fire department already had a way in?" The fire marshal, who had been asked to attend, said yes. She asked, "Then why were we told our safety depended on cutting his lock?" Karen said the board had concerns about delay. The fire marshal said the lockbox system was the approved emergency method. Another resident asked whether the HOA was allowed to cut the lock. The HOA attorney gave a careful answer about disputed interpretations. My attorney put the clause back on the screen, and no one needed a translation. The developer representative then stood and said marketing materials referencing West Ranch Gate access had been suspended pending legal review. He said the developer had relied on HOA statements and would need to reassess emergency planning, access disclosures, and buyer communications. That was a polite public warning. Karen tried to pivot to the main entrance construction. She said residents had real traffic problems. She said the West Gate would have helped, and she said the ranch owner could have been neighborly. A man in the back shouted, "Neighborly doesn't mean you get to cut his lock." That line got applause, and Karen lost the room right there. The board voted to withdraw any claim to resident use of the West Ranch Gate, cooperate with the fire marshal, correct resident communications, and negotiate a cure of the easement breach. Karen voted against part of the motion, and that vote would cost her later. The cure letter came 3 weeks later, written by the HOA attorney, not Karen. Cedar Valley acknowledged that the West Ranch Road was private property subject only to a limited emergency access easement. It acknowledged that the HOA was not authorized to cut locks, open the gate, use the road for resident traffic, or advertise it as a secondary entrance. It confirmed emergency access would remain through the approved fire and sheriff protocol only. They paid for the lock, the gate adjustment, legal fees, survey fees, fire marshal review, and a settlement for unauthorized access and property interference. They also had to send a correction letter to every resident. That letter mattered. It told residents the fire department already had emergency access through the lockbox system. It told them the ranch gate was not for daily traffic. It told them the HOA could not open the gate without proper authority. And it told them the prior communications had been incomplete. Incomplete was the soft word. Misleading was the accurate one. The developer revised its materials, and the phrase, "secondary emergency ready access," disappeared. Buyers were notified that the West Ranch Gate was not a resident entrance and not part of the subdivision's usable access. County planning required updated emergency route documentation that did not rely on my road for anything beyond the original easement. Karen tried to hang on. She told residents she had acted out of concern. She said she would rather be blamed for being too protective than fail during a crisis. And she said I had exploited technicalities to restrict a safety route. But residents had seen the documents. They had seen the fire marshal letter. They had heard the sheriff refuse to open the gate, and they had watched her order the lock cut with no emergency present. At the special meeting, Karen was removed as HOA president. The security volunteer resigned from the access committee, and the contractor lost HOA work and received a formal complaint from my attorney. Cedar Valley adopted a new policy requiring legal review and fire marshal confirmation before touching any gate, lock, road, easement, emergency route, or private access point outside HOA-owned property. It was a good policy. A broken lock too late. As for me, I kept the new lock, not because it was expensive, but because of what it represented. The old lock had been my father's. I kept the cut pieces in a drawer in the barn, next to the old gate keys and a copy of the easement. Sometimes I look at it when I need to remember that property rights are only as strong as your willingness to defend them calmly. The new sign is still on the gate. Private ranch emergency access. Fire, sheriff, ambulance only. No HOA resident traffic. Lockbox approved. It is clear because clarity prevents stories. Karen's whole strategy depended on blurry words. Safety, emergency, community, readiness, circulation. She used those words until residents believed a locked private gate was a threat. But real safety is not created by panic. It is created by protocols, records, clear authority, and people knowing exactly what they are allowed to do. An emergency easement is not a blank check. It does not let an HOA cut locks because traffic is inconvenient. It does not let a board president turn a ranch road into a detour. It does not let a developer advertise access. It does not control, and it does not erase private property, because the word safety sounds powerful in a meeting. I did not close the emergency road. I protected what emergency meant. Fire still has access. Sheriff still has access. And ambulance still has access. Cedar Valley residents do not. That is not cruelty. That is the document. If an HOA ever tells you they have emergency rights over your property, read the easement before you believe their version. Ask who can use it. Ask when. Ask whether the gate can stay locked. Ask who holds the key. And ask what happens if they misuse it. And if someone cuts your lock while calling it safety, do what I did. Record everything. Call the sheriff. Call the fire marshal. And call an attorney. Then let the document explain the difference between an emergency and an excuse.